Welcome back, Exegetes of the Book of Kings. We will be looking today at just briefly covering chapters between chapter 9 and chapter 17. I know this is a big jump, the biggest jump of our syllabus in terms of chapters that we're translating. It's not intentional necessarily, it's just there's only so many things we can do, and focusing on the Elisha stories is probably better in terms of preaching, teaching content for use in congregations than the historical materials between 2 Kings 9 and 17. There's a lot of really interesting stuff here, though, so definitely don't just turn by it. Read through from chapters 9 through 17, and you'll find fascinating stuff like the end of Jehu's coup, the slaughter of the worshippers of Baal, and then the fact that Jehu was okay but not great, that strange person Jehonadab, son of Rechab, which you can read more about in Jeremiah 35, and the Rechabite people, who seem to be almost like very fanatical ancient Israelites who acted like they were all Nazarites, that is, that they didn't drink wine or plow land. I mean, there's a fascinating subgroup of Yahwists. So in sort of a nomadic lifestyle, perhaps hearkening back to a very ancient form of Yahwism before Israel was settled. So anyway, really, really fascinating stuff. And then Jehu also dies in peace, but also without reuniting with the southern kingdom and centralizing worship in Jerusalem, which is what the Deuteronomistic historians would want him to do for him to be a good king. So he's close to a good king, but not good. But then also you get this strange juxtaposition, this kind of jump in chapter 10, verse 32, that in those days the Lord began to trim off the parts of Israel. So there's this suggestion that Jehu actually maybe wasn't that good, that it's during the reign of Jehu that there's this shift to Israel's demise. You could read it that Jehu wasn't tough enough, or that the kings who came afterwards were a lot worse, and so on. But also perhaps, if you read through Jehu's coup, there are a lot of suggestions that at least one layer of the narrators are critical of it, the bloodthirstiness of it. And the positive depiction of Jezebel's, somewhat positive, somewhat misogynistic, and kind of horror, filled. But the hints that are kind of positive towards Jezebel suggest to me, at least, that some people were upset with Jehu's violence, and especially his violence toward the royal family. So all to say that this seems to be a complicated text, and then in chapter 10, verse 32, there's this shift towards the destruction of the northern kingdom, and we're on a downward slide from chapter 10, verse 32, all the way to chapter 17, which we translated for today, which of course focuses on the demise of the northern kingdom, which we think we would measure that in about 722 or 721 BC. Okay, so chapter 11, we have this really interesting story of Athaliah, again, a queen who takes over. It's sort of like Jezebel, sort of like Queen Makkah. We've come across this kind of misogynistic portraits of women seizing power and being associated with sort of polytheism or idolatry. It might be possible that Asherah worship and so on was associated with women like Queen Makkah, precisely because it was more of a female cult. But I don't actually buy that. I don't think that female goddesses were worshipped by females and so on. That seems to be a modern projection in the ancient world. So in any event, this probably has rootage in an actual historical event. That is that Queen Athaliah takes over. She's the one queen, really, that rules solely in the southern kingdom, and she's depicted negatively. Now, perhaps because of misogynistic reasons, that she is understood negatively and depicted negatively in terms of history. It's also possible that she was not fully in favor of Yahwism. This might also have had to do with her being a woman. That it's possible that at this time that Yahwism was critical of women in leadership positions. I don't think that that's true, though, at this point in time. I think that's a later. I think it's a Persian period and beyond, a Hellenistic shift. in part simply because you've got prophetesses like Huldah and other prophetesses who are mentioned in the Old Testament, and then there's this later redaction that takes away a lot of them or makes a lot of them anonymous or reduces some of them, but you still can't get rid of people like Deborah. So in any event, there's something really interesting happening here with women in power and worship and Yahwism, and just to be honest, in scholarship, it's not really fully worked out yet. So in any event, this story here of Athaliah trying to murder the royal family, this is common too. Jehu just murdered the whole royal family. This is not a female thing, right? Jehu just murdered the royal family of Ahab in order to get rid of it for the succession purposes. So Athaliah thinks that she's kind of gotten rid of the royal family's lineage, but then there's the child Joash who miraculously survives. It's an interesting story to read. And then there's the death of Athaliah, which is again a bit like the story of Jezebel, story of the deposition of Queen Makkah. I mean, this kind of almost joy in the pain that women feel in these positions. So in any event, this is another troubling story that might give us some insight into the sociological workings of Israelite gender politics. So in any event, this is worth your time to think about here. And then in chapter 12, we have this radical shift to a very different kind of story, away from the kind of bloodthirstiness of both northern and southern kingdoms and the power politics, almost Game of Thrones like palace intrigue that we get in chapters 9 and 10 and 11. And then in chapter 12 we get this shift to the temple, and it's kind of it's almost a naive story of like them discovering how to do temple like repairs. I mean, it's like discovering the idea that you need to be in charge of buildings and grounds. So here we get this story about how are we going to repair the temple? Well, I mean, and really it's kind of in light of an unstable monarchy. The monarchy is supposed to be doing this stuff, but if there's not a monarchy who's in charge of it, then how are we going to get money for the house? And so they decide to like collect these tithes and put it in a box and not use it for other purposes and actually give it to people who will really repair the temple and take care of it. So this is a little story of almost like a pastor who realizes they need to actually take buildings and ground seriously. So anyway, if you want a little like kind of palate cleanser after all that death and misogyny, chapter 12 is quite interesting. And then we shift to Aram and Hazael in chapter 12. Joash dies, and then in chapter 13 we move on to we shift kind of lenses to the northern kingdom, back to the northern kingdom again, and we hear about the story of Jehoahaz. And there's a couple of interesting things right here. First of all, they're fighting against Aram, but then now there appears to be another a rising threat that is not Aram. So Aram, the Arameans, from Damascus, the Syrians, all the same people, right? Those folk have been the main enemy of Israel for quite some time now. In chapter 13, we get the first insight into another looming problem, but it seems like it's going to help Israel at first, because this looming problem is a problem for Aram. And that's verse 5 of chapter 13. Therefore the Lord gave Israel a savior. I mean, my goodness, this is, this word, like a savior. The Lord gave Israel a savior so that they escaped from the hand of the Arameans. This is Adad Nidari the third. This is the king of Neo-Assyria. So, just I want to point out that the savior of Israel, it's not clearly identified in this story, but it's Adad Nidari the third, the Neo-Assyrian king who defeated Aram and gave some kind of breathing room to the northern kingdom of Israel. Of course, that's going to change really quickly because Neo-Assyria is not going to stop there, right? But for a time, it works. Then Elisha dies, and there's this another miracle story of Elisha that's kind of in here in chapter 13, verses 14 through 21, and finishing with that amazing story of this guy who, because of time, is just kind of thrown into the burial cave of Elisha and then comes out walking on his own feet. This is, not resurrection, but resuscitation, but, is kind of likened to the Lazarus story in Christian tradition. So it's a kind of a touch miracle, right? Touching the bones of the relics, really, of of powerful people who have died. And then in verse 22 of chapter 33, chapter 13, verse 22, we shift again, and King Hazael of Aram oppressed Israel all the days of Jehoahaz. So we're like back to Aram. This is before the Savior kind of thing, but the Lord was gracious to them and had compassion on them. He turned toward them because of his covenant with Abram, Isaac, and Jacob, and would not destroy them, nor has he banished them from his presence until now. Now, this is a really interesting comment here, because as we all know, what we translated for today was chapter 17. This is about the demise of the northern kingdom. So what in the world is happening here until now? Now, perhaps this means that this is written not yet at the destruction of the northern kingdom, or perhaps it's written after the destruction of the northern kingdom, but yet the northern kingdom, even though the kingdom doesn't exist, the people haven't been banished from the presence of the Lord. That is, that God still has a plan for them. I would say that the latter is probably right here, because this reference to the covenant to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, all those things linked together, that seems to be kind of a late tradition to be thinking of in terms of the entire populace. Other earlier writers like Amos and Hosea will refer to Jacob, or sometimes to other ancient figures like Moses and Miriam, but they don't spend a lot of time linking all those together and then linking that with the covenant and then linking that with both the northern and southern kingdoms. This seems to be a somewhat late way of talking about Israel as a united whole and as the story of all of the matriarchs and patriarchs and the covenant tied together. So this is probably a Persian period. This is kind of a late or maybe even exilic way of thinking about it. This is also tied to like Ezekiel and Jeremiah, and how really Ezekiel more than Jeremiah talks about how like the reunification of the north and the south. Remember Ezekiel's thing in chapter 37 with the two sticks that comes after the valley of dry bones. He puts the two sticks, one Judah, one Israel, together and unifies them and turns them into one stick by placing his hand over the place where the sticks join. Right, so this is he's banished them. Yahweh hasn't banished them from his presence. That is to say, Israel is still in Yahweh's presence, even if the kingdom has been destroyed. Probably, that's at least my guess. But in any event, it's just really interesting comment here, and this is like God. This is Yahweh's salvation. So in any event, or it could be that this is an ancient text too. So then in chapter 14, we shift back over to Judah, and there's a story of Amaziah. There's this conflict with the Edomites. There's a reference to the book of the law of Moses, which is really interesting here. So the kind of further on in time we get. Remember Solomon, David, we didn't see them reading from the book of the law of Moses, but here we actually see this reference to the book of the law of Moses here. And it's not in the story exactly, but it's kind of used as a proof text for the story. We're going to get to more of the written word when we move on, and there's the discovery in the time of Josiah. But keep your eye on that, where the actual book of the law of Moses is actually mentioned in the text from here on out. So then in chapter 14, verse 23, we shift again to the northern kingdom, and things are starting to get desperate almost with Neo-Assyria, but there's this little respite here. So in the 15th year of King Amaziah, son of Joash of Judah, King Jeroboam, son of Joash of Israel, began to reign in Samaria. And I notice there's two Joashes here. Could be actually the same guy, historically, who unified the kingdoms for a little bit, but it also could be that they actually are different guys, and just had the same name, happen to have the same name. There's another interesting problem in a couple of chapters with Pekah and Pekahiah. Could be the same guy. They seem to reign at the same time, which is confusing. One seems to reign over Samaria, another over Israel. Maybe Samaria broke away from Israel for a while. Anyway, there's some historical problems with what ensues, and we're not exactly sure about the political situation at the time. However, so then verse 24 of chapter 14, this is the king here, Jeroboam. We call him Jeroboam the second. They didn't do that back then. Just called him the second. It was just Jeroboam, son of Joash. But we can see Jeroboam kind of in a way, at least the biblical authors of the Deuteronomic history are getting us to try to think of these two Jeroboams together, right? They both are doing these terrible things. But for a little bit here, he restored Jeroboam II is doing well, right? In verse 24, he restored the border of Israel from Lebo Hamath as far as the Sea of the Arba. So he won some victories, and this is probably southern and to the south and to the north, according to the word of the Lord, the God of Israel, which he spoke by his servant Jonah, son of Amittai, the prophet. This is the actual Jonah in the Bible, right? This is a book of Jonah, who was from Gath Hefer. For the Lord saw that the distress of Israel was very bitter. There was no one left, bond or free, and no one to help Israel. So Jonah, the actual prophet in history, was a guy who prophesied the expansion of the borders of the northern kingdom and was correct about that. I think it's important for us to realize that, this, like, he was a nationalistic prophet who was correct. This links up a bit with the prophet Jonah we see in the book of Jonah, but in other ways it's really an interesting pushback. So just keep that in mind when you read the book of Jonah, that this is where that comes from, but also that the biblical prophet might be a mockery of this ancient guy. That is because Jonah flees and is worried and is not, he's kind of his nationalism is disproven. He has to go preach to Nineveh, and they believe more than the Israelites do. So anyway, Israel's distress is responded to by a prophet, and Yahweh comes and saves them. And in verse 27 of chapter 14, we see that word save again, that there's another savior. Okay, so then in chapter 15, we shift again back to Judah. And this is, things are going okay. Bad in the very bad. You're going better in the north for the time being, but soon things will fall apart. In the south, there are still these kind of same problems. There are high places and so on. It's really interesting. There are always high places, and even Solomon is worshiping in high places. Keep that in mind. When is the first time we ever see the high places actually get taken down? Except for in stories like. Foreign high places, non-Yahwistic high places, like in the story of Gideon or something. But the first time we actually see high places get taken down is Hezekiah. And that's what we'll be talking about later this week. So then we get Menachem in chapter 15, verse 17, and we see the first reference to the king of Assyria, verse 19, King Pul of Assyria. And this is the nickname for Tiglath-Pileser III. So King Pul of Assyria came against the land, and Menahem gave Pul 1,000 talents of silver. So Israel is starting to buy their freedom, and now they become really subjects of Assyria. And then in chapter 15, verse 20, that Assyria turns away, and he didn't stay there in the land. So Pul leaves; he buys him away. And then we get this interesting thing with Pekahiah and Pekah, which seem to overlap in some ways, and there's some confusing history happening there. Then in verse 29, in the days of King Pekah of Israel, King Tiglath-Pileser of Assyria came and captured Eon, Abel-Bath-Maachah, Janoah, Kedesh, Hatzor, Gilead, and Galilee, all the land of Naphtali. This is kind of the northern part. And he carried the people captive to Assyria. So the Assyrians are already starting their policy of deportation. They would take certain peoples from lands that they had conquered, and they would kind of scatter them abroad in other places, and then take other people and put them in the lands that they had just conquered. The whole purpose was to make it difficult for the people in the lands that they conquered to revolt successfully, to communicate with each other and create a nationalistic revolt. So if they break down ethnic kind of solidarity, then they can divide and conquer. But yet everyone can still farm together, even if they can barely communicate, because pretty much everyone in the ancient Near East has similar farming techniques. So all to say that this is a strategy for rule and for creating an actual empire. So we're going to get to this, of course, again. So this is we're on our downward trajectory here, and then we shift to Ahaz in chapter 16, and then there's another story about basically Damascus, which is now a vassal of Assyria, and the king of Judah going there and seeing this amazing altar. And then in verse 10, King Ahaz, this is Ahaz, not Ahab, right? Ahaz is in the south, Ahab is in the north. And remember, Ahaz is at the point in the story, remember in Isaiah chapter 7, this is King Ahaz, right, who's really scared of Damascus, and he's also really scared of Neo-Assyria. Remember, he becomes a vassal of Neo-Assyria in that story of Emmanuel. So here we can see this happening. In verse 10, when King Ahaz went to Damascus to meet King Tiglath-Pileser of Assyria, he saw the altar that was at Damascus, and King Ahaz sent to priest Uriah a model of the altar, his pattern, exact in all details. So Damascus makes a Neo-Assyrian altar because now they're a Neo-Assyrian vassal, and now King Ahaz, now that he's a vassal, says, I want the same thing, because it's going to prove his loyalty, right? And so then he offers offerings at that thing, and verse 18 said that he did this because of the king of Assyria, right? So this is the worship and vassal treaty stuff and the politics and the internal economics. All of it is linked together. The worship is not disassociated from any form of life in the ancient world. So you can see that all tied up together here. So in any event, then in chapter 17, we get to the part where we're actually dealing with today. And so King Shalmaneser comes up against Hoshea. Hoshea pays him tribute, but then Hoshea, the king of the northern kingdom, tries to kind of bargain with Egypt and get Egypt to help him revolt against the king of Neo-Assyria. So then verse 5, the king of Assyria comes and invades all the land, and he captures Samaria, and then he deports many people. And then you get the Deuteronomistic explanation for that starting in verse 7, right? This why this happened. I mean, of course, they've given you one reason why it happened, internal and external politics of the northern kingdom. But there's also another, kind of the foreign policy aspect. But there's another aspect here, and that's their worship and their sin. And the constant calls by prophets in verse 13 for them to come back. But then this kind of long-standing golden calf issue. So this goes all the way back to 1 Kings 12, right? And then chapter 17, verse 19, you see Judah, right, that gets a little bit of scorn here too. It seems to be kind of stuck in the middle of here. Perhaps this was done later, after the southern kingdom falls. Maybe they had a version of this when the southern kingdom was kind of trumpeting its own success, and then, of course, that had to be revisited later. So in verse 23, Israel was exiled from its own land to Assyria until this day. So whenever this was written, that was still the case, and the way that's phrased seems to suggest that it's a possibility they may come back. Okay, so then there's verse 24, and that's what we're looking at today. Verses 24 through 34. Sorry, that was a long intro, but all of that is, of course, context for this, and that's all. This is the longest span we'll have between chapters for the entire course. Okay, so Vayave Melech Ashur mi Bavel u mi Kuta u me Ava u me Hamat u Sepharvaim. And I'll stop here for the Zakef Keton. So, and he made go. I know that this looks here like this is a middle week. This should be a call perfect, but that would be via vo, would be and he went. Via ve, we have a different, we call this a theme vowel, like the vowel that kind of determines, and usually I tell you to look under the performative. So this is the performative here, right? This yod, this is a third masculine singular, imperfect or vav consecutive prefix. And then I tell you to look for the vowel underneath that. That's going to help us, right? Usually it's a hirek for the call, it's a schwa for the pl, it's a short a class, a patach for the hifel. Here we have a long A class, which usually signifies call for middle weeks, or sometimes it can be part of the nifal triangle, right? But that would be underneath the first root letter, okay, not under the prefix. But here, so we have this, we can see this as a middle week, but it's difficult after that point to know whether it's a call or a hifel middle week. Here we look at the middle week and we look at the actual vowel. Now, vo, like via vo would be a holum, that's the theme vowel for the call. And the theme vowel for the hifel is usually an I or E class, right? So hifil. So here we have the long tsere, the long I, E class vowel. So this is our hifel. Hifel, vav consecutive, third masculine singular. So vayave, and he made come, or he brought, Melech Ashur, there's our subject following the verb, the king of Assyria, mi Bavel, from Babylon, Babel, and from Kutha, which is another place, and from Ava, and from Hamath, and from Sepharvaim. These are other places. These are all cities that are, in the Neo-Assyrian sphere of influence in some way. Babylon is the interesting outlier here. Babylon, it was part of the Neo-Assyrian sphere of influence, but the other cities are actually kind of part of the core territory of Asher. Um, in any event, there's people being kind of settled in that place. We imagine and we have evidence that these were people who have been conquered maybe from other places. It doesn't seem like Assyrians were actually sent to like colonize places. That's really a later Greek and really a military thing. And even the Persians didn't really settle people places. They would send a couple of Persians to oversee things. But in any event, we're not talking military colonies here. These are probably just people who were settled from around the Neo-Assyrian Empire who themselves were rebels or in some way had been conquered. And then, so these are, all these nations, right? So there's, 5 names mentioned, all these foreign places, right, where people are coming from and being settled in the northern kingdom. So, Vayoshev ba'arei Shomron. I'll stop there, Zakev Katon. And he put or placed, made dwell, right? So this is a hiffle again, this is a hiffle from Yashav to sit, dwell, rule, reign, even to sit in a throne. But here, and he made sit, or the way this is really being used here is to make someone live somewhere or to make someone dwell somewhere. And he settled, but Array in the cities of, and I say the cities, even though there's no ha here because it's in construct. So this is the plural. This would be arim, but this is from ear, right? City, and then so this is array, cities of, and we have a definite name next. So it's going to be the definite. This works back up the chain, right? Our construct chain. So in the cities of Samaria, Shomron. So he made them dwell, or he settled them in the cities of Samaria. Tachat b'nei Yisrael. Tachat means under, but it can also mean in the place of. Like if someone usurps the throne, they rule in the place or under tachat. They would reign tachat their, the other person. So here, in the place of the children of Israel or the Israelites, right? The people of Israel. So it's kind of in their stead. So like they're supplanting. So this is that kind of sense of like foreign people are going to displace us, right? A little bit of that nationalistic, xenophobic sentiment, right? So Vayirshu et Shomron. We'll stop there. Zakiv Katon. That was the Athnach back here, by the way, under Israel. So. And they possessed, this Yerash is the verb that's used where the Israelites inherit or take possession of the land. So here they're taking possession, these foreigners are taking possession of the cities of Samaria, the northern kingdom. And they possessed or dispossessed, right? At Shomron, Vayishvu, and they lived, or they dwelled, they settled, Ba'areha, in its cities, in the cities of her, or it, right? Third feminine singular object suffix, referring back to Shomron or Samaria, which is grammatically feminine. Okay, so here we have the settlement. Vayehi be. Here we go. This is, the preposition in or with, ba. It starts with the schwa, of course, but here this word starts with a schwa. So 2 schwas in a row, you get the rule of schwa. So the first schwa is going to turn into a hirek when you have 2 schwas in a row. That both would be either vocal or non-vocal. Bit hilat, and hilat means something like the beginning. So in the beginning of, it's in construct, the tav there, in the beginning of Shivtam, the dwelling. This right here is an infinitive construct, a call infinitive construct, and here is the object suffix, third masculine plural. The dwelling of them. So and it happened at the beginning of their dwelling, Sham, there. Here's our Zakev Katon. So it happened at the beginning of their dwelling there, or when they started to live there. Lo, Yar'u, they did not fear, et Adonai, or Yahweh. Vayeshalach Yahweh, bahem et ha'arayot. Here's our Zakev Katon, so we'll stop there. So they did not fear Yahweh, and so sent Yahweh. This is the PL form. Notice our schwa underneath our performative. Notice our double middle radical. This is for shalach, to send, which when it occurs in the PL, this is like someone sending something else. So Yahweh, the subject comes after. Yahweh sent, bahem, with them, or among them, et ha arayot, lions. So Yahweh sent lions to them. The Lion of Judah kind of thing. This is maybe a totem animal in some way of Yahweh. The kind of cherub, the lion, the lion body, and so on. So Yahweh sends lions. Vayihyu horgim bahem, and they were horgim. This is from harag, which is to kill. Ho. This is our holum over our first radical. This is a marker for the call participle, the call active participle. This is masculine plural ending here, so the ones that killed. And so they were killing, right? Remember the participle can be an ing word, a gerund. So, and they were killing bahem, with them or among them. And they started to kill them. Okay, so this is the foreigners come and then Yahweh starts to kill them with lions. Why? That's maybe something we can think about here together. So Vayomru lamelech Ashur lemor. I'll stop there. The inverted segol here is a good accent, disjunctive accent to stop with. And they said, this is kind of the it's a call imperfect, but it's kind of functioning here like they say. Who's they? They say that the chemtrails are in, whatever airplane, whatever it is. So like these things that they say, right? And this is like his advisors or something. But they said to the king of Asher, saying, so this is maybe his advisors, anonymous advisors. Ha goyim asher higlita vatoshev ba. Are Shomron, I'll stop there because of the Zakif Katon, saying, the nations which you, and then if you look carefully here, you got too many letters, right? You have a ta at the end. You know that is the marker here of a perfect, right? This is a perfect ending, zipatatiu tentenu, and then you have the hi beginning for a hifel. So this is from gala. You lost your third hey, it turned into a yod. But it's from that root gala, which means to uncover, remove, or go into exile, right? And so the nations which you have caused to remove or to go into exile, the ones that you have carried away or something, and this is again a hifel. For first yods, the hifel turns into this holam vav. That first yod will kind of metamorphize into the holam vav here. So vatoshev, the ones that you caused to go into exile and you made to dwell, or you settled in the cities of Samaria. So we haven't got our full thought yet. Lo yada'u, they do not know, et mishpat Elohei haaretz, the Athnach, I'll stop there. They do not know the mishpat, the law of the gods of the land, or the god of the land, depending on how you read it. I mean, they're polytheistic, right? But I mean, when there's a disaster, that there's an assumption that you have in some way offended the gods in the ancient world. So these lions, there's an epidemic of lions coming and getting people. So maybe we've done something wrong, right? Part of it is that they don't even know the gods of the land, right? This is the idea that gods are territorial. They're nationalistic, right? Gods are associated with certain geographical locations where their temples are, where they're going to be taken care of. So we're not taking care of the god of that land. The god of that land is going to get mad at us, right? Vayeshalach bam et ha arayot Hinam, Hinam, not Hinam. Hinam. Mamitim Otam. Stop there, Zakif Katon. So, and he sent Bam with them, or among them, at Ha'ariot, the lions, the Hinam. This is from Hine. Behold them, and check them out. Mamitim. This is from mut. Here's our root here, mut. We have a mem with a schwa here. That's our PL participle marker. Here's our masculine plural ending. So they are killing, right? Remember, the PL can sometimes be like kind of cause, like, Hiffel's causative. The PL is factative, turning someone into something, right? So they are making die. They are killing. Otam, them. Here's our et, but it has an O, so it's object. Object, them. Here's our object suffix. So they are killing them. Ka'asher, enam, yodim. Zakakaton, I'll stop there. Just as, or sometimes ka'asher, just as or because sometimes. Enam, ein is a form of not, right? Like lo, ein. There is not, them, they do not have. Yodim, here's a call participle, call active participle, masculine plural here. They are not knowing. Et mishpat Elohei haaretz. What do they not know? The object of that is the law, or the sort of judgments, the ways of the God of the land, or the gods of the land, right? So they don't have adequate knowledge, religious knowledge, and the gods are trying to get them, right? Okay, so then, Vayetzav melech Ashur, Lemor, Holichu, Shama, Echad, Me, HaKohanim, Asher, Higlitem, Misham. Stop there, Zakakaton. And he commanded, this is from Tzava. It's a PL. You don't have the double middle, right? It's from Tzava is the root. You have a third hey that you lose. And when you lose the third hey, you can't double the middle radical in the same way because you can't end with two consonants. But so this is a very common verb here, this form here, and he commanded. So you'll find this in the law a lot, right? Like in Moses, in Deuteronomy and so on, or when discussions about the law, or kings, I guess, who create law. So Vayatzav, and he commanded the king of Ashur. So the king of Ashur commanded, or Syria, commanded, saying, Holichu. This is a confusing form here, but it's a hiffle imperative. So I know, it's tricky because you have a hey as your first letter of the root, and you also have a hey as the marker of the hiffle. So here's your plural. You could see that, right? Here's your infix tirek yod in halak, so that's a hiffle of some kind. And then you have this O form here. Now, what you'd expect with this oo ending is you might expect that it would be an imperfect, but you don't have the imperfect beginning. It's because it got cut off, right? So it's a hiffle imperative. So make, cause to walk, cause them to go, or send. Shama, there, and then sham is there, right? And then shama, their words, locative hey. So send their words, or send to their. Achad, one. Me, from ha kohanim, the priests. Asher, higlitim, which you caused to go into exile, right? Here's the hiffle beginning. Here's our tem ending, our perfect ending, and the gala root, our third hey turned into a yod here. So which you caused to go into exile, misham, from there. Vayelchu, vayeshvu, sham. Our athnak, I'll stop there. And they went and they dwelled there. Or you could say, and remember we have chains of verbs, right? So here's our chain of verbs starting with a imperative. So if we start with an imperative and then we have vav plus imperfect, this continues the chain of imperatives. So make them go there. Send one of the priests whom you send to exile there, one of their own priests, right? And let them go, and then let them dwell there. Now, one of the priests, maybe he's really meaning multiple priests or one group of the priests. Vayorem, And this comes from the root yara. This is actually where Torah comes from. It comes from this root yara, which often will just show up with this kind of resh because it's a week, first and third week, right? So if you ever just see a resh hanging out by himself, if you ever see just a kaf hanging out by itself, it's that strike verb. If you ever see a resh just hanging out by himself, it's this yara to teach or show. So this is a hifel form, the yo, right? We have our o up here for our first yod in hifel, and teach them et mishpat, the law, Elohei haaretz. Teach them the law of the gods of the land, that land, right? I mean, it doesn't say that land, but that's what it means, the land of Israel. So, vayavo echad meha kohanim asher higlu mishomron. So, and he went, or he came, so one from the priests, which he had sent into exile from Samaria, vayeshev Baveit El. I'm going to stop there for the Athnak. And he lived, or he dwelled, in Beit El, Bethel. You know, good old center for northern worship. Vayahi Moreh Otam. And it was Moreh, and he was teaching them, really causing knowledge or something like that. But this is again that root yara, and here's the mo, which is a hifel participle. This is the beginning again for hifels of first yods. Here, mo re, make, causing to teach or causing to know. Then he taught otam. Here's our object. It's et o object, and here's our object suffix here. Taught them. So he lives in Bethel and taught them. Ech Yir'u et Adonai. How one or they can fear, they will fear. This is from Yara, to fear, how they might fear Yahweh. So in other words, how to worship Yahweh. Vayehu osim goy. And then goy. Elohav. Vayanichu bevet ha-bamot asher asu ha-shomronim. Stop there for the Zakif Katon. And I mean, I kind of blew past the Zakif Katon here and an Athnak, but I'll go back and translate all this. Yeah. And they, here's a plural, right? And they were making. Here's our, from asa, right, is our root. Here's our holim over our first radical, our noun ending. We lost our third hey when we added an ending here, but it's from asa, to do. And here is our participle form, plural. And they were making. Goy. Nation. So I don't know exactly what to do with that, but just the many nations, every nation, all nations. Elohav, its God. So every nation was making its God. And Vayanichu, and they nuacht, or they rested. This is from nuach, nun, vav, chet, the root. And they, this is a hifel form, by the way. We have our, under our performative, we have a patach, that's our normal form for the hifel. So, vayanichu, so they made them rest, they caused them to rest. Baveit ha-bamot, in the house of the high places. So in the shrines of the high places, right? So they still were making their idols, their gods, and they were putting them in these, they were making them rest, right? They were like giving them a home in the high places. In those temples, you know, the temples that weren't in Jerusalem, right? Asher asu ha-shomronim, which they made the Samaritans, which the Samaritans had made, the high places, that is. So the Samaritans made all those high places, and the nations were still making the nations who had been settled there, right? Goy. But Ba'arehem, in the cities of them, in their cities. Asher Haim, Yoshim, Yoshibim, Sham, in which they were dwelling there. Va'anshe Bavel asu et Sukkot Banot, and the men, the people of Babylon, made Sukkot Banot. This is a name of a deity of some kind. That name, Sukkot Banot. Sukkot is like the festival of Sukkot, right? This is their some kind of deity, but Banot is like sons. So the sons of the tents, or like of the lean-to, the shacks. It's really interesting. Va'anshe Kut, and the men of Kut, Asu et Nergal, they made Nergal. Va'anshe Hamat, Asu et Ashima, and the men of Hamath made Ashima, a deity, right? V'ha'avim, and the Avites, or the people from Avim, Asu Nibhaz, they made Nibhaz, another deity. V'et Tartak, and Tartak, another deity that they made. And here's our Athanach. We'll stop there. V'ha-Sepharvim, and the Sepharvim folks. And then Shorfim. This is a sheen, which has its sheen dot, and then also that merged with the cholam dot. Sorry. But here's a call active participle here for burning. This is like from... sorry, a scene dot, seraphim, like, this is like the seraphim, right? But this is soraphim, to burn. So it's like a seraph, burning the serpent thing. So this is the scene dot, which merges with the holam dot. Some places, some ways of writing Hebrew will separate these out and have just two dots next to each other. Some will just merge them. But the soraphim, so they were burning at Benehem, their children, Ba'esh, in fire. Now this seems like child sacrifice. It's possible that this, of course, we'll see this come up later in the Book of Kings with Judahite kings as well, who pass their children over the fire. It could be like a mock, like a ritual where children go over a fire, as in like almost like acting out some kind of fake killing or sacrifice. But we don't know. We don't have a lot of evidence that there were burnings of children in Jerusalem or anywhere else in the Northern Kingdom or in Babylon. It just doesn't seem plausible. So this might be propaganda, but maybe it refers to something real that we just don't have a lot of access to. But in any event, burning the children in the fire, La Adramelech. So this is a king, right? Adramelech, but the god, right? V'Anamelech, another king, royal name for God, right? So the burning their children in fire to Adramelech and Anamelech. Eloha, the god of, and then in the Ketiv Kareh issue, this is the Ketiv, what's written. What's Kareh read is Elohe, because it's plural gods. It should be more than one. Eloah just means one god. Elohe means gods of. And then Sepharim, their place, right? But this means like scribes. But Sepharvayim is the Kareh, because that's the name of their place. Otherwise, it'd be the god of the scribes. So it's got to be miswritten in some way, probably. But anyway. So Vayihyu Yoreim et Adonai Athanach. So, and they were fearing et Adonai. Vaya asu lahem miksotam, and they feared the Lord, and they made, created, appointed to themselves, to them, from the ends of them. And this really means like from all. It's like a way of saying like to the very ends of them, to like the, if you think of the Venn diagram, everybody included, right? The whole circle. So they appointed from all of themselves, kohane, priests, Bamot, of the high places. And what they mean, all of them, they mean all these nationalities probably. So Vayihyu osim lahem bavet ha-bamot. And they were doing for themselves in the houses, the shrines of the high places. Probably that means doing their work, right? It's a priest to do the priestly stuff, the sacrifices and so on. So et Yahweh hayu yareim, and Yahweh they were fearing. Va'et Elohehem hayu ovadim, and the gods of them they were serving. So the other gods. So they were loving Yahweh and they were also loving other gods, right? This is a core problem. They don't get it. They don't get this is a good way of thinking about it. The foreigners don't get the covenant. It doesn't make any sense to ancient Near Eastern people if they came from somewhere else, right? The exclusivity in worship, it's ridiculous in the ancient world outside of Israel. So, kamishpat ha-goyim, according to or as like the rule or the customs or the law of the nations. So according to their own customs, right? Of course, you got to keep worshiping your own God, or maybe you don't have to, but it's good to keep worshiping your own God and to worship the gods of the places to which you've been displaced. Asher higlu otam misham, which they had been, he had sent them, right, them from there, to which they had been displaced from there. And then we'll finish this bit with Ad hayom hazeh Haim osim, and then kind of until hayom, which can mean the day, but can also mean today. Hazeh haim, so like until the day. Hazeh, the this. So until this day, haim osim, they are doing ka mishpatim, according to the ritual, the regulations, you might say. Ha Rishonim, the first, the original, the former, like their previous, right? They are working according to their previous laws. They haven't taken over Yahweh's law, even though they respect Yahweh. So, Enam Yoreim et Adonai. So, there is not, right? This is Ein. There is not them, or with them, among them. Like, they do not have Yareim et Adonai. They don't really fear Yahweh. Va'enam osim kahukotam. There is not to them doing according to the statutes of them. They're not really following the laws, right? Uka mishpatam, or their statutes, their laws. V'ka Torah, or according to the Torah, or according to v'ka mitzvot, or like the commandment. Mitzvot are the commandments. Here's the commandment, kind of summing up everything in one commandment. Asher tzivah, which was the Lord Yahweh commanded. Tzivah, this is the PL perfect form here that you'll see this a lot. Tzivah Yahweh, Yahweh commanded. Et bnei Yaakov, here's the use of Jacob for the northern tribes, right? To the children of Jacob. Asher sham shamo Yisrael, whom the name, his name, or there he named, or according to his name, Israel. So Shem meaning name, here Sham perhaps name of, or it could be a verb here, call perfect third masculine singular here for seem. So this is for to set or place, which can be used with the noun here, shame, name, to mean put, like name someone, to name someone, to put a name on someone, right? So who the Lord, the assumed subject here, whom Yahweh set his name, Israel. So Jacob, whom the Lord named Israel. So this is kind of showing familiarity with that story that we find in Genesis, but also kind of the irony here of what has happened in the Northern Kingdom, that the name has been changed in some way, right? So in any event, this is the founding story from the perspective of the Southern Kingdom. And from the perspective of Jews, of what has happened with the Samaritans, right? These foreign, half foreign people, they're mixture. They worship. They don't, they worship other things. Their worship is kind of mixed up with other kinds of worship. Of course, if you talk to Samaritans, they worship Yahweh. They read the Torah. They think they follow all the commandments, at least the ones they recognize. So any of that, we can have some discussion about this in the comments. All right, I know this is a bit long, but trying to summarize a whole bunch of stuff and then trying to read carefully a bit of a difficult text. And we'll get back to talking about. Kind of move slowly for the next couple of chapters, and we'll talk about Hezekiah next time, and then we'll talk about Hezekiah again. All right, I'll